Colored inlays are possible without using the epoxy, just using alternative materials that actually work great. Let me show you how to do it today. Hey everyone, welcome back to Papa's Workshop. One of the things that I really enjoy doing is using the epoxy to do the inlays. Well, today I want to do something totally, completely different. I want to challenge myself to do a little bit of experimenting and use an alternative to the epoxy. Oftentimes, you have a very small project and you don't want to mix up the epoxy, or maybe you're out of epoxy and you still need to get an inlay done. Well, that's what I'm going to do today, is experiment doing the inlays without the epoxy. Now, several years ago, I made this paracord jig and I cut out all the different numbers and the lines on here with the CNC machine, but I never actually filled this in. Today I want to experiment with the micro powders to see if I can use the CA glue to be able to fill this in, and I'm also going to be using baking soda as an experiment, also mixed with the micro powders. Should be a fun experiment, and if it all works, this paracord jig will actually have inlays of all the different numbers and these lines. Let's see what happens. Now, I did a little experiment. I know that when you use the baking soda and you mix it with the CA glue, this becomes rock hard, and it can be used for many different applications. Now, this time I took the mica powder, this is black, and put it by itself. No baking soda was mixed into it, and I wanted to see how this reacted, and this got rock hard also. So I think being able to use this by itself as a standalone item or mix would be a real good combination to be able to make these inlays. Now, the first thing I want to say is that this paracord jig made out of this premium pine board is not the ideal candidate to be able to do this experiment. It's soft wood, it's very porous, and that can be a problem. The micro powder will get into the pores of the wood surface itself, and that CA glue will bleed into that wood also. Now, the ideal thing is get a piece of hardwood, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to actually show you exactly what happens when that micro powder absorbs into the wood and that CA glue gets into those pores as well. Now, part of it we can take care of just by sanding. Bigger part, had I sealed this wood first, that would have helped greatly. So keep that in mind when you're working with your project. If you're going to work with a soft piece of wood, seal it real good first. But today, you're going to get to see exactly what happens without sealing the wood and still using the micro powders, the baking soda, and the CA glue. Now, the first thing I'm doing is putting just a little piece of this blue tape to create a form so that this micro powder and the CA glue does not spill out. And I think I'm going to do that on both sides. So I'm just going to take a small piece of the tape and slip it right down into here. Now, I only need it sticking up just a tiny little bit, and that should be plenty. Then I'll use the little popsicle stick to be able to seal it. And that should work just fine. And the first thing I want to do is put some black micro powder into these lines and see how that works. The micro powder that I'm using is from Starbond. It's a black, it's the iron oxide pigment. You only need a tiny little bit, and I want to be able to fill this in. Micro powder is actually very fine, and it will, as you can see in this video, how that micro powder is actually getting into the pores of the wood. And it fills it all the way to the edge. Now, quite frankly, when I cut this out, this was one of the first projects that I had done, and I cut this way too deep. So now I want to remove as much as I can. And we'll put that back into the jar. All the micro powder that you see on the surface is actually going to get embedded into the grain of the wood. And when mixed with the CA glue, it's going to cause a problem that will have to be sanded. Now that's completely full. Then I'm going to take the Starbond thin glue to be able to put onto that. I want you to look closely as I drop the CA glue onto this line. Most of the CA glue is actually going onto the surface. Yes, some is getting onto the actual line itself, but the vast majority of CA glue is actually flowing onto the surface. This I did not expect. The micro powder itself is actually dispersing the CA glue away from that line and putting most of it onto the surface. And I'll use the Starbond accelerator just to speed up the process. I'm going to get this out of the way so it doesn't blow everywhere. And we'll see how that does. Now some of it did settle down in because I didn't really pack it, but that's okay. I can come back and add just a little bit more of the micro powder. And I think I'll do that. So what actually happened? Well, actually, when you put the micro powder in there, it's not packed good and solid. There's still a lot of airspace. So when you put that CA glue on there, it settles and it creates the surface again where it needs more of the micro powder. Now the other problem, I want to point this out now that I did not realize at this point. When you spray the accelerator on there, it's actually drying on the surface. Again, that has the cavity completely full. We'll drag off the excess. And we'll add the CA glue again. So learn from my mistakes. Don't use the accelerator as I'm doing here, because what's happening is drying on the surface and it's not drying underneath. And now you can see, I don't know how well you're going to see that in the camera, but that cavity is completely full. Now since this is the first experiment just with the micro powder, I'm going to let this dry. We're going to sand it off. We're going to take a look at it. After a quick sanding, you can look at this, and this micro powder is completely filled to the surface. It looks actually very good. You can see just a little bit of the CA glue where it bled into this soft wood that I have, but still in all, that looks very good. Now I think if I actually sealed this, it would probably do a better job. But I'm very happy with the way that turned out. And this is rock hard, so that is real good. So using micro powder by itself along with the CA glue works extremely well. Now what I want to do next is actually mix some micro powder with the baking soda, and we'll fill the number 15. I have a little jar of the baking soda that I keep in the shop, so I'm just going to take a small spoonful and put it into this little 1-ounce cup. That should be plenty. Now I'm going to use this ruby red, which is the Starbond micro powder, mixed with the baking soda, and we'll put it into 15. We'll use about that much, I think. Look at that. That is absolutely beautiful. I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but you can see how it just sparkles. Now we'll mix that up. Now there's a little bit of chunks in here of the baking soda. I want to make sure I get that all broken up really good. And one of the things that I like, if you compare this color is just a tad bit lighter, but not a lot lighter. And that's to be expected using the white baking soda. All right, so let's fill this cavity. Please remember, this 15 is a very deep pocket, really too deep. So if you're going to do this and you have a very deep cavity to be able to fill this a little bit at a time and put the CA glue in there. I am not doing that here, and that actually made it far more difficult to be able to completely fill this cavity correctly. So again, I said I was going to be experimenting today. So yes, there are some things that I had done wrong that I've learned, and I want to share those things with you. I'm going to try to pack it in this time and see if we can't do this in one step. And we'll take the excess and put it back in here. Take a look also how that red mica powder along with the baking soda has got into the pores on the surface of the wood. Again, this I'll push over into there. Make it just a little bit overfilled. As I put the drops of the CA glue onto this mica powder and the baking soda, I want you to see and pay particular attention to what happens. You see how part of it is just rolling off? Yes, it is beginning to soak in. You can see the number 1, how it's soaking in and actually settling down deeper. So even though I had overfilled it, with the CA glue dropping into that pocket, it's actually sinking down and that micro powder is actually settling. You can see how when you actually put the liquid onto it of the Starbond CA glue, it still will sink down even further. And that's really to be expected. Even though I packed it in, it's going to be able to find those little bitty air gaps. So we'll spray that. We'll let that dry for a moment. Now this is where, if I had really been thinking, I would not have used the accelerator. Because what's happened is that the accelerator has worked on the surface, but not down below. And at this point, the material on the surface is hard, and I'm putting new micro powder onto the surface again. What really should happen, leave the accelerator out, use that wet CA glue, and then go ahead and pack the additional micro powder and baking soda onto that surface. It would immediately begin to react and fill that gap and fill that cavity that we have on the numbers 1 and the 5. And we'll put the CA glue on it again. This time I want you to notice as I drop the CA glue onto this surface, it's sinking in and soaking immediately. Why? Because there's a hard surface just below this powder, and that makes all the difference in the world. That's why I say that really deep cavity needed to be done a little bit at a time without using the accelerator. Okay, we'll give this just a minute to dry, sand it off, and let's see what it looks like. The sandpaper that I'm using is 120 grit to be able to sand this off. And you can see that does not take long, and that looks really, really good. Now, one of the things that we can do is take a little bit of alcohol just to show you what it's going to look like when I put a finish on this. And you can see how nice that looks. It also evaporates very quickly. But that is going to work out real well. I'm going to go ahead and fill up some of these other numbers. I want to try another little experiment where I fill this cavity just half full, drop in some of the CA glue, and then top it off again. And let's see if that makes a little bit less of a mess on the surface to be able to sand. May not. We'll put some over here in the 1. We'll see if we can keep as much off of the surface as we can. Now let's drop in some CA glue. And you can see how that settled down in there. Let's hit this with the accelerator. So there's very little on the surface now. Let that dry for a minute. Then we'll add in some more of the material. Need to get a little bit right in there. And it's still sunk in a little bit more, so we'll have to do a third one. So I think doing the way I did it on the number 15, just pack it in as tight as we can, and then doing it works actually better than trying to do it in layers. This will be the last time, and then we will go ahead and sand it. Take a little alcohol, put on this paper towel, and just wipe this off so you can see what it's going to look like. That actually looks fantastic. So I think this is a real good alternative for little small projects to be able to do. And then once you're all finished, you can just come back and put whatever finish that you want over this, and you're going to have a nice project that can be done very quickly. Now I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and take this whole entire side and mask it off and put all the black in here at once, and then we'll come back. I think I'm going to use some different colors in here to be able to accent this a little bit and get this finished up. Now I slipped the tape in here. I rubbed it down all the way down so it sticks good, and that creates that little bit of a form that I need so that the pigment won't fall out. Don't need it up in this area, of course. Now I did mix in just a little bit of the baking soda in this and then the micro powder, and you can see that's still a nice black color. There's still a few pieces of the baking soda that needs to be broken down and get rid of those chunks. But I think that's going to do good. Now this baking soda is going to help to extend the micro powder itself, because I don't want to just fill in all micro powder. I think that's just a waste. And this will make it where you can really get a lot more bang for the buck by being able to use the baking soda to be able to put this into the inlay. So I can just fill that in, move it down to the next one. I can also use the popsicle stick to help drag it over. You can see how that fills it in very quickly. I could use a popsicle stick to spread this micro powder quickly throughout the whole entire side of this project. And it forces that micro powder right down into the little slots. I wanted to try this small little tip that goes onto the end of the CA glue, just to see if I could control the actual flow of the CA glue, and quite frankly it did not really help. The CA glue was still spreading out onto the surface just with the reaction to the micro powder and the baking soda. So this was not a success either. So I'm going to abandon this and go back to the original process. Granted, it doesn't look like much right now, but I went ahead and used an emerald green to put in here. I put in a cobalt blue, and then the ruby red to finish up what I had down at this area. So I just went ahead and filled it in, didn't care about what it looked like, because all this will get sanded, and hopefully it'll be beautiful when it's done. Okay, so what did I learn from all of this? Well, the first thing is that the micro powders along with the baking soda works extremely well. And quite frankly, using the micro powders by themselves work well also. Now with a pocket as deep as I had, which quite frankly was too deep, you have to do it in layers. Put a little bit of the micropowder in, put a little bit of the CA glue and build it up. And the other thing that I learned, don't use the accelerator. Let it dry on its own. Takes a little bit longer, but you're going to get a better product. The other thing that I want to be able to tell you is when that you're using this, yeah, wear gloves, because I did get the micropowder on the hands and I used the alcohol to be able to clean it off. And that worked out fairly well. To start with the sanding process, I'm using 80 grit paper to remove the bulk of this baking soda and the micropowder, and then I'm going to switch over to 120 grit paper to do the final sanding. After sanding, I did come back with a little bit more of the micropowder to fill a couple little holes. Now you can see how the CA glue seeped into the pores of the wood, and that quite frankly was expected because one, this is a premium pine, very soft wood, and I did not seal it to begin with. So that will show you what will happen as you use a very soft wood with the CA glue. It does soak into all the different little pores. After the final sanding, I put a shellac sealer on it, and here's a look at the finished project. For all the different mistakes and experiments that was taking place with this project, I think quite frankly it turned out quite nice. At this point, I'm ready to be able to put this jig back to use and make some paracord projects. Well, there you have an alternative to using the epoxy resin to do your inlays. You can use the mica powder and the baking soda to be able to have very successful small inlays to be able to work quite nicely for a lot of different projects. Now there's other materials that you can use too in addition to the micropowders. If you have aluminum shavings or copper or brass type shavings, that will work really, really good also. And that would give you, for an example, a brass inlay using the shavings and the CA glue. The same thing in my shop, I use quite a bit of aluminum. And that too, if you take those shavings, you can use that as the inlay material and create some beautiful work. So I hope you liked this short video today. If you did, by all means, thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. So for now, everyone, bye-bye. Can't wait to see you real soon.